There we go. Recording in progress. We are being live streamed. Hello, everyone. Welcome to History Matters, and so does coffee. We're going to be talking about the press today. There's so much to talk about. But before we launch into that conversation, I turn to my wonderful partner in crime, Annie, who will explain the rules of the game.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Annie Evans from New American History. Delighted, as always, to be with you here on Friday. If you're new to this group, welcome. So here's how this works. Joanne's going to talk about today's topic for about a half an hour. I will come back then, and we will look for your questions in the Q&A. The chat is your place to share ideas and comment all along. But if you have a specific question about today's topic, we would love for you to put that in the Q&A, and I'll be back in a little bit.
And as we say every week, and I will repeat it again, if you are here for the first time, please say so in chat. We have an amazing community here. This is the 257th episode of History Matters. So over all of those episodes, we've built up an amazing community. And if you go into chat and tell folks you're here for the first time or one of the first times, you will get a robust welcome from the wonderful History Matters community. Okay. So the press, um, we now live in times. We have been living in times where there's a lot to talk about all the time. And this week, I almost wasn't going to talk about the press, but a friend said to me actually last night, a lot happened in the press this last week. So he is right, and Rosie agrees. So a lot did happen and has happened in the recent past regarding the press. So most recently, or I think most recently, we have Jeff Bezos with the Washington Post announcing that they are now only going to have in their opinion columns, they're going to talk about free markets, right? That somehow opinions can only be one kind of opinion in their opinion column. And although people have been saying, yeah, but the news will still be the news, I'm sorry, but that's a declaration of where a newspaper stands itself, and that matters. So first we had the Washington Post declaring now it's going to only talk about one sort of thing on its opinion pages. Then we had the Trump administration. This is not getting you to be quiet, Rosie. This is not a working experiment. So then we had the Trump administration announcing that instead of having the press that has access to the president, to Q&A, to cabinet meetings, to photo ops, being picked by the White House Correspondents Association, which is a bipartisan organization, instead of having that pool of people be selected in a broad kind of a way, now the White House wants to be able to pick who has access to the president in that way. So suddenly, in a pretty dramatic change, the White House will be deciding who covers the White House. I almost don't have to say anything about what that means, but very clearly, how do I want to put this? Think about what it might mean to have a state-run media. I'll just throw that right out there and leave it there for you to ponder. That we have the president deciding how the president is going to look before the public. We had the Associated Press being punished because they refused to call the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. So in any number of different ways, it's not new that President Trump and before the pre-president, President Trump, or current president, President Trump, has been very eager to quiet the press, to control the press, to rope the press in, to punish the press, to denounce the press because he doesn't control the press. Now he's gone that extra step to just control the press. And what I want to talk about today, and I've addressed it in one or two different ways before, but I want to talk about why it's important for the press not to be controlled by the government. I want to talk about how the founding generation thought about a free press, why they essentially considered it a kind of fourth branch of government. And obviously, in having this conversation, I just want to alert us to think about what's happening, to not let this pass under the radar, like, oh, well, I guess we'll be seeing different reporters. I guess we won't be seeing some. Oh, well, I guess the Associated Press won't be there anymore, and not to think about the implications, because the implications matter pretty profoundly politically, as well as in any number of other ways. But let me talk a little bit historically about the press. Essentially, one of the challenges that the founding folk saw in creating the country was how dispersed it was, how widespread geographically. And they were always worrying about how does that work, right? I mean, republics, I was going to say Republican small r governments, republics, historically speaking, tended to be small. And in a republic, the people need to be informed. The citizens of a republic need to be informed. They need to know what their government is doing because their opinion governs. They're the ones responsible for giving power to people and taking power away. They need to know what's happening. They need to understand what it means. And in a geographically small republic, that's possible. But so what do you do with a, spread out Eastern Seaboard republic? How does that work? How are the people informed? How do they know what the government is doing? How can they judge for themselves what they think about the government? How can they respond against acts of the government that they believe to be unfair or corrupt? How does the heart and soul of a Republican government, small r, Republican government, function if it's so spread out? So that was, a concrete issue that people thought about. And one of the answers to that question, which is how we get to the logic that the press is kind of a fourth branch of government, the press, newspapers. Newspapers will, as James Madison put it, contract the bounds of the country, bring the country together by spreading news. Now, it's important to note that newspapers in this time period, newspapers that were considered national, like the Gazette of the United States or the National Gazette, they had a subscription of maybe 2,500 people. And they were handed person to person, and they were read out loud at taverns, and they were read out loud on the street. And so it wasn't one newspaper, one person. But even so, generally speaking, we're not talking about, tens of thousands of people being reached with one title, one newspaper. Even so, foreign observers, when they came to the United States in this time period, referred to the United States as a newspaper country, right? This is they're constantly obsessed with newspapers. So, and again, part of the reason is Americans understood that the government was theirs and that they are entitled to know what's going on. Now, that said, the press wasn't objective in this time period, right? There were business newspapers, there were mercantile newspapers, there were, newspapers that served a specific purpose. But titles like the Gazette of the United States or the National Gazette or any number of, more localized newspapers, they were largely funded by one or another sort of partisan group. And they pretty much had a partisan slant, a partisan message. They weren't trying for objectivity. Now, they did sometimes print arguments from the other team, so you could actually read an argument in its entirety in a newspaper. But the press was free, and that was considered important, and it was talked about all the time in the early republic and the founding era, and it was also understood to be somewhat unreliable at times because the press was free, right? So it could say whatever it wanted. But underlying all of that was the assumption that the press is a tool of accountability. It informs public opinion. It enables citizens to be good citizens because it tells them in one way or another what's going on in government. They can think about it, they can act on it, they can ask questions about it, they can have conversations about it, they can be informed. And to be a good citizen in a republic, you need to be informed about what the people who you have given power to are doing. We've talked about this a lot of times here on History Matters, that some of the core components of a democratic form of government are free and fair elections, the rule of law, and accountability, right? Free and fair elections so that we, the people, can give power to the people we want to give power to. the rule of law, so that no one is above the law. We don't believe in kings, as we discussed last week here in the United States. So no one is supposed to be above the law, not even a president. And accountability, because the people we give power to are public servants. They serve us. We give them that power, and we have the power to take that away. So those three things, free and fair elections, the rule of law, accountability, essential to the heart and soul of a democratic government, or of government in a republic, a democratic republic. So the press was seen as essential tool of accountability. When the government first began, 1789, 1790s, one of the issues that they discussed concerning directly this was, should the doors of the Senate be open or closed to the public? And, you know, they went back in history, as they always did, in the Enlightenment. All of history was like a grab bag of precedent. And so you could go back through all of history and pick and choose examples and then decide on the sort of eternal rules of nature concerning whatever. And so historically speaking, sometimes the higher branch of a legislature was not open to the public. But this was an issue in the early republic, because if the Senate had its doors closed, how would anyone know what was going on in the Senate? And we have Senator William Maclay, Pennsylvania Senator William Maclay, who's, I know I've talked about him a good amount, this wonderful dour senator who kept this amazing diary and wrote everything down in the diary, what the debates were, what was happening around him, snack foods that people were eating in the Senate, stupid things he heard people say, you know, stupid things people were wearing, like everything you want someone to say in a diary, Maclay put in his diary, political and otherwise. So in 1791, when the Senate was talking about a national bank, right? Hamilton's idea, we need a national bank, Federalists and the Republicans saying, you know, that's not, you can't do that. That's like, the Constitution does not give us the power to do that. This becomes obviously a big argument about implied powers in the Constitution and what you can and can't do. But when this debate is happening, this is, I believe, January of 1791, Maclay writes in his diary, having listened to part of this debate, this is a quote, "I am now more fully convinced than ever I have been at the propriety of opening our doors, the Senate doors. I am confident some gentlemen would have been ashamed to have seen their speeches of this day reflected in a newspaper of tomorrow." So he's saying these people are getting up and saying things that they would not say publicly. They would not say in front of the American public, but they're happily pontificating about it here. And if there were newspapers covering what we say, these num-nums wouldn't have stood up and said that. They actually would think about what they were saying, and the public would know what was going on here. So newspapers were political, not just in a partisan way, but in a structure of government kind of a way. You can watch the press discover its power in this period by seeing how they treated George Washington. So when Washington, you know, a legend in his time, father of his country while he's still alive, becomes president, and initially the press was pretty afraid to criticize George Washington, and they didn't do much of it for a while. And then after a while, gradually, as partisanship begins to rise, and as people, you know, there's enough of a pattern in what Washington is doing that some people are beginning to object. And particularly, you have some people who ultimately become Jeffersonian Republicans who are thinking that maybe he's acting Washington in a kind of maybe monarchical manner, and they begin to object in one way or another. Suddenly, the press begins to be more critical of Washington. And then you get the rise of the National Gazette, which in a sense was created as an opposition press. They didn't say it that bluntly, but you had the Gazette of the United States, which was very much in favor of what the government was doing, was ultimately a Federalist newspaper. It's the Gazette of the United States that had on the last page, newspapers in this period are like 4 pages long. I mean, you had big stories on the front, national news on the inside left, local news on the inside right, and then ads and poetry and things on the back page. That was your newspaper. So it's the Gazette of the United States that had Ode to the National Bank, Oh, mighty bank. It had a poem, an ode to the bank on the last page, Gazette of the United States. So that was a government happy newspaper. The National Gazette, which is brought into being largely through the efforts of James Madison and Thomas Jefferson, is seen as something that's got to oppose that other newspaper. There has to be another voice. And again, they were opposing the politics of the other paper, but they also were arguing, we need the people need to be informed, and they shouldn't just be informed of one opinion. They should be informed of many. They should have access to a wide array of opinions, unlike the Washington Post opinion page, apparently, from here on out. So this idea that newspapers were, in essence, kind of a part of government goes all the way back. And ultimately, when the press, not just the National Gazette, but when newspapers realize that they actually can criticize some of what Washington is doing, they begin to criticize him. He does not enjoy this at all. He's not used to being criticized, George Washington. And I know I've told this story before, but I'll tell it again anyway, because it's one of my favorites from this time period. There's a cabinet meeting, and we know this happened because Thomas Jefferson recorded it in a sort of memo to himself. Henry Knox, who's the Secretary of War and a little bit goofy, I will say, not to insult Henry Knox, comes in with a cartoon that he bought off the street. It was being hawked on the street. And it's a guillotine, and it shows Washington sort of being walked up a guillotine to be beheaded. And obviously it's calling him a king, and it's hearkening to the French Revolution. And Washington goes bonkers in this meeting and has a rant of rants. And Washington had a great, meaning big temper, notoriously, famously so, but he kind of restrained it a lot of the time, and not in this particular cabinet meeting. So he begins to rant, king? They say I want to be a king. I don't want to be a king. I've never wanted to be a king. I don't even want this job. I wanted this job. You know what? I have regretted this job but once, and that is every single moment since I took this job. He just rants like a crazy person, goes on and on and on and on in an almost comical way. And Thomas Jefferson records this. And then the best part of this, and this is why it's one of my favorite anecdotes, Washington finishes this rant of rants, and then Jefferson writes on his little note to himself, "There was a pause. Some difficulty resuming our conversation." It's like Washington howls to the wilderness, and you can just feel that room. They were like, now what do we do? But that was a response to newspaper criticism, cartoon criticism, the press in one way or another criticizing George Washington. Not used to it, but something that the press is entitled to be doing and should be doing. And again, that goes all the way back to this time period. Now, what happens when we have a quasi-war with France in the later 1790s, and the Federalists, who are not necessarily really eager to have newspapers critique the government because they're in power of the national government? That's when they come along and say, ooh, Sedition Act. We are in a time of quasi-war, and it could be hurt national security to have the press attack the government at this time. So you can, as a matter of fact, I wrote an article on this, I think called The Cultural Logic of the Sedition Act, that was published in a book. So I don't know how easy that is to find, or if you can find it online. But at any rate, my argument in this was, so the Federalists come forward and they say, no, we have a political important national security reason for wanting to punish people who attack people who hold office. The Sedition Act, it's a matter of national security. But they also say, ooh, we can totally destroy Republican newspapers and editors. How handy. And they're doing both of those things at the same time. They're taking advantage of the political climate to try and silence the press. So it's a political maneuver, and it's a political maneuver, again, that shows the fact that they understand the power of the press, and at this point, they don't like being criticized by the press. So the idea that a free and independent press that can cover what's going on in the government, can report on that to the nation, and over time, when you get steam-powered printing presses, and you get the railroad, and you get any number of other sort of technological and other sorts of innovations that enable news to spread more quickly, it becomes even more and more considered kind of a central component of the nation as a whole. Something can happen in Washington, and ultimately, by the time we get out of the 1790s, it's Washington, and can get across the country in a remarkable, to them at least, remarkably short amount of time. Then you get the telegraph in the late 1840s, and then, woo, you can read in the congressional record how essentially freaked out people in Congress were at the idea that they could, kind of along the lines of what Maclay said in that quote I offered a little while back in 1791. Like we say something here, and then in 45 minutes, the entire country knows we said that thing. That's a little scary, right? And that complicates, let's say, government and the way that government works. So that's a long roundabout way of saying, from the beginning, the idea of a free and independent press has been key and central to the idea of being the core and heart of a small R Republican government grounded on public opinion. How else does the public know what's going on unless it has a free and independent press, free and independently able to say what it wants, and not just to say things that the current administration likes? Fisher Ames, who is this another conservative, dour but witty politician in the 1790s. I didn't look up the quote, so I don't have it at my fingertips here. But at one point, he complains that when Congress is not in session and there aren't newspapers covering what's going on in Congress, the rest of the country has no idea what's going on in the nation as a whole. And without newspapers, like if he says at one point, the mail isn't being delivered, without newspapers, this is close to an exact quote, we sit in darkness. We don't know what's going on anywhere. We're just sitting here. He's sitting in Massachusetts, Dedham, Massachusetts, wondering like what's going on in the rest of the country. I don't know. So the press holding the country together, even as potentially it rips the country apart, but holding it together as one nation in information, crucial. And I'm telling all of this, I'm repeating all of this as a reminder of the sweeping implications of what we're seeing now with the national government, with the current administration trying to clamp down on what press gets access to the president. So, ideally, I'm sure from their point of view, you're either going to get people not criticizing the president so they can get access, they can be on the inside, or people will try to criticize the president and they'll be booted out of doors. So, if we will no longer have as open a channel to observers of what's going on, we will see a view of the president and his administration. It will be a view that the president and his administration like. That will not be a full view of what is going on in the government. It will not be, because that's explicitly what this administration doesn't want. They don't want criticism. They don't want some of the, rather questionable decisions they're making right now, she said diplomatically. They don't want these mistakes and sort of extreme things that they're doing right now that are savaging the government, ripping it down. They don't want us to see that. And if we see it, they don't want us to think about the implications. They don't want a press that exposes and explains. They don't. They want a press that niceifies, right? They want a press that comforts. And so that's what we're going to get more of. So what that means for us is that we have to be not just smart consumers of the news, we have to be aggressive consumers of the news. We have to think about where we can go to get news from independent outlets. And I don't necessarily mean let's just seek news we like. I'm saying let's find outlets, news outlets, that are willing to actually report. And find news outlets that don't agree with you, but that aren't under the full sway and control of this administration. They are going to try and are trying and to some degree might succeed in blocking out bad news, blocking us from seeing bad news, blocking us from seeing questionable decisions, blocking out the working of our government and what our servants, our public servants, are doing. There will be press outlets and reporters trying to do the job of covering and exposing and explaining in the way that the press should be doing. But increasingly, we're going to have to find them. We're going to have to look for them. They're not going to be as easy to find. And the simple fact that the Washington Post, you know, what the Washington Post did, there are two aspects of it that grab at me. One is the fact that they're doing it, right? We will now only report one kind of opinion on our opinion pages is kind of shocking. But the part that to me is very reflective of the moment that we're in is that they announced it kind of proudly. This is what we're going to do now. And we're in this moment where a lot of things that seem rather reprehensible, whether they're bigoted, whether they're racist, any number of reprehensible things are being proudly proclaimed. Look at us, we're doing this, with the assumption, of course, being that there will be people, and there are some people, who are going to applaud those measures. But there are a lot of us who do not applaud those measures. And there are a lot of us who are not going to be thrilled with what we're allowed to see of what our government is doing. So please take this moment to think about where you will seek news. We will have to seek news, but do it, because we can't act as informed citizens. We can't understand what the government is doing. We will have a far narrower understanding of where we are and where we're going as a country if we don't have access to news that the administration does not necessarily like. We're going to have to be not only smart consumers, but assertive consumers of news. And as I started out by saying, that idea of the central political patriotic importance of news to American citizens, and I say patriotic because as a good citizen, we need to and have to understand what our government is doing as fully as we can. We need to be good patriotic American citizens and do our best to be informed. Varied opinions, but not just the outlets that this administration has decided it likes. Okay, 2 minutes over. Okay, that is my pitch for today. I'm gonna close my, I'm gonna save my notes and close my notes. Hello, mug. Okay, so for those of you who are new, for those of you who are new, so I didn't hold up my mug at the beginning like I normally do because I can't remember where I put my mug cover. And it's here somewhere, but I don't know where it is. So for those of you who are new here, every week for 257 weeks, I've had a mug of some kind that is related to the topic at hand. What I realized today is, first of all, I only have about half of my mugs here, and half of them are at a friend's house, and I need to go and get them from her apartment. So all of my good press mugs are not here. So I was distressed. However, I believe Dale, you're going to have to tell me if this is true. I think Dale gave me this mug, and this is a recent mug gift. It has Mark Twain on one side, and on the back it says, "History doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. Mark Twain from The Gilded Age, A Tale of Today, 1874. Mark Twain was a writer who informed people about what the heck was going on. So I thought, although my best press mugs aren't here, Dale, and Dale, I gotta open chat. Dale, you have to like confirm that I'm not making it up, that you gave this to me, but I believe you did. Yes.
Yep, you footnoted it, he said.
Indeed. See? Anyway, so it is a press mug, and if anyone was interested in outing corruption and telling the truth, excuse me, Mark Twain was really good at it, and he did it with humor. So that is my mug choice for today.
All right. So I lost connection. I don't know if you noticed while you were talking there, the hotel Wi-Fi just gave out. So I'm now on my cell phone. So I'm hoping I have enough battery left. Because
I did not notice.
There's not a plug close enough to where I am. Of course, you know how hotels never put the plugs where you need them. So we're going completely off cell battery, kids.
Uh-oh.
So Claire, it says there's only 3 questions, but I don't know if that's because I lost. Did I lose questions or are there really only 3 questions? Because that seems odd. Can you tell, Claire, are there more than 3 questions in the Q&A? Because I can only see 3, but it
There are
might be,
more. So do you want me to email these to you? Because there are 10.
yeah, if there's 10, then definitely, unless there's a way that you
Okay.
can put it back. So,
Start with the ones that you have, and then I'll
okay.
reformat them so it's not like a bunch of
Okay. Or people could just put their questions in. That might be easier. If you put a question
Oh
in,
yeah.
hey, Gloria and Julia.
Okay.
So anybody before 10:30, can you please just put your question back in? That'd be a lot easier.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to start with Gloria because Joanna, it was so cool. This week I was on a webinar and Gloria was in the same webinar as I was. It was so fun to like see her in a different environment. So hi, Gloria. So she said, in the previous administration, the president rarely had a press conference. When they did, maybe the president took 2 or 3 questions, but it was mainly lecture. Is having a free press, is that not also controlling the press?
For
Not
sure.
at all.
Yeah, no, for sure. The manner of how press conferences are conducted varies and can be more controlled or less controlled. And throughout American history, different presidents have handled that in different ways. And sometimes presidents appear and are open to questions. Sometimes it's largely left to their, press folk, the main press person who deals with the press. It varies. So I think I guess I would say there's a spectrum of press control that we could talk about. I would say taking a few questions and then not taking any more is one degree maybe of control. I would say deciding who is not allowed in the room is a pretty extreme on that spectrum. That's another extreme. So I think that is a different kettle of fish. And I don't think I've ever used that saying before in my life, but I think that is a different kettle of fish when you're just basically saying, if you say things I don't like, you're not allowed in the room. Again, when you're in, I mean, at press conferences, right? People know who is in the audience and they pick and choose who they get questions from. There are any number of ways in which you can steer that kind of a conversation. But just not letting people in the room is I was gonna say a cut above, a cut below. It's much more extreme than sort of being scared that someone's gonna ask a scary question.
Sue Baird has a really good one. She says, Joanne, where do you go for your news now in this changing media environment? So people are looking for tips of like, what can we trust?
Yeah, and I don't want to necessarily like point out one. I will name a couple. James said when I said about not letting people in who have bad news, he said it's gangster crap. I just like the phrase gangster crap.
And a good band name.
Go ahead. A band name. It is a good band.
A great band name. Yeah.
We're really good at making up band names.
We are.
I mean, I do actually think Heather, who footnotes everything she says, Heather Cox Richardson, her letters from an American are excellent. There are outlets like ProPublica that has been doing really great reporting. There's the Bulwark, which I think is out there doing great reporting. There's the Contrarian, which had just started like the last 2 or 3 weeks and has a wide range of people reporting, some of it video, some of it written, that I would recommend checking into. So there actually are outlets, but the fact that you're asking that question, oh, there you go. Joyce Vance, Democracy Docket. Thank you for throwing these up here. Yes, these are good. I'm trying to catch up because some of you are.
People are posting some of the ones that you said in the links.
Yeah. So yes, that's actually really good. Put in chat some of the ones that you like. Wired, sometimes Mother Jones. So yes, keep putting some in chat for people to see. You know what I would do if you're so inspired? And that's right. There are a lot of people on Substack. Make a list for yourself. Write on a piece of paper a list of places you can look. And when you sit down in the morning and kind of want to know what's out there, you got a list, you got, or like make a, what do you call it?
Playlist?
No, well, not a playlist, but like, okay, you guys are going like link, what do you call it when you have online on your computer?
Oh, like bookmark it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because I'm so high tech. Have a special bookmark list that's like press outlets, and it'll be right there. You just open it and like can go to the outlets you want. So you only have to think about this once, and then you can just instantly have that there. That is what I would recommend.
And of course, I'm going to always put in a plug for Bunk.
Yes, I was going to say, I just saw you put it and I was like, bunk.
Got to put a plug in for Bunk.
Yeah.
All right, so that lots of good stuff in there. And Blue Sky, a lot of teachers have gravitated away from the other platforms towards Blue Sky. So we are slowly migrating most of our content. That's where we're mainly sharing our work now.
And there are lists. There
Yeah,
are like,
yeah.
Yeah.
So you can join a list and that way it kind of drowns out the noise and the teachers are kind of carving out their own corner there. So that's helpful too.
That's right. So here, Linda, ProPublica, Mother Jones, The Atlantic most of the time, Heather's Letters, The Guardian, actually, I do look as well. So yeah.
All right, now we've got some questions back in the Q&A. Thank you, everybody,
Okay.
for submitting your questions. Sorry you had to do that. All right, so our good buddy Dave said, the presumption that the press matters is being a tool of accountability is people will read what's there and think about it. It seems to me that foursome, a golf reference, teed off years and years ago. Perhaps more children dying of measles, which is happening in Texas now, will be news that makes people think. He's wondering what your thoughts might be on that.
That people don't tend to think about the news as much as they should.
That the press is a tool for accountability and they don't feel that way anymore.
Oh. Well, that's part of why I did this particular episode. I should just write like accountability across my forehead because it is. I think you're right. I think some people don't think of it that way. And I think, this morning when I was casting about online and I was like, Jefferson is going to have some pithy things to say about the press. And if you go, there's something called, for your amusement, those of you who are here may be amused by this because you're my people. There's something called the Jefferson Cyclopedia. And you can find it. It's online. You can even download it. It's a 19th century publication. And it's just like you go to newspapers and it has like random newspaper quotes that Thomas Jefferson said about newspapers, about everything. So if you want to be that person at cocktail parties, it's like, what Jefferson said about the Jefferson Encyclopedia will be great. But so I went there this morning. I was like, I wonder like if I review what he says about newspapers, what that would look like. What it looks like is there is no free country without a free press. I hate the newspapers. Like the press is the essence of good citizenship. We'll be safe as long as we have a free press. They're licentious and full of lies. So that goes all the way back to that. Even when people realized it was essential, they also thought, what the hell? Like, what is the press doing? It doesn't matter one way or another. And it's true. Perhaps it will be something like the measles not being covered, because certainly if this continues on and we have more and more measles deaths, that will not be covered by the outlets that President Trump likes, I would assume, because, heck, like anti-vaccine administration. And maybe that is the sort of thing that will get people to realize, guess what you're not hearing about? I don't know. I mean, the one thing I will not try to do is predict in this climate anything, but.
Yeah. And I'm a little alarmed. I guess they canceled 2 CDC meetings where they talk about rolling out the flu vaccines for next fall. And if they don't have those meetings, they can't
pick what strains they're going to put into.
Mm-hmm.
So basically,
and that's really frightening to me.
It is. They canceled the meeting to decide what next year's vaccine is going to be. So
yeah,
indeed, which was to be held in March.
So my friends and I are planning a road trip to Canada to get our flu shot in the fall. If they'll let us go up there and get a flu shot. Wow. All right. So that was a great question, Dave. Thank you. Kathy Porter asks, would you say Trump's nonsensical press conference is an attempt to flood the zone? I saw on a Bulwark podcast that Trump can lie and dissemble and manipulate the narrative.
Oh, I'm sure. I mean, this administration is constantly trying to flood the zone in every way possible, right? Like, there are so many lies that you can't tell what are not the lies. You can't keep up with the flood of firings. And I mean, it's almost impossible to keep up with what's going on now. And it's, going to be increasingly impossible because we won't hear about it in the press. So yeah, I do think there's an attempt to flood the zone. I think there's an attempt to bury truth with lies. I think there's an attempt to make it impossible to follow what's going on. Yes, because, the same reason that I read, and we'll see what happens, I read that there are a number of Republican members of Congress who have decided they're just not going to have town halls anymore. Why? Because people stand up and protest what's happening, right? We don't want that happening, so we'll just not have town halls anymore, and then we won't have that platform anymore. There are going to be all kinds of ways in which, we're going to be seemingly cut off from signs of protest and disagreement. Doesn't mean they're not there, but it means we're going to have to look for ranges of opinion and certainly go beyond whatever the people are who are allowed in the room, where it kind of isn't happening because who knows what's being said now in that press room and how reliable it is. But still, we're going to have to be assertive press consumers now.
Yeah. And I don't know if you saw or heard earlier, kind of as you were logging in, the DOE sent out kind of like what our governor in Virginia did when he first got inaugurated 3.5 years ago, this teacher tip line kind of a thing to report DEI. People that are breaking his DEI executive order, and you're supposed to rat out your teacher. And I was explaining to folks while we were waiting on you to log in on that they tried that in Virginia. And what happened was this was kids, high school kids up in Northern Virginia started this, and it spread all over the state. They used the tip line that was designed to snitch on your teacher. They just flooded it with thousands of "my teacher's awesome, my teacher teaches the truth, I love my teacher, I love learning the truth." And it was so overwhelming that they had to shut it down. And the press tried to FOIA it to prove that we aren't teaching CRT in Virginia public schools. And the governor refused to release it, even though he should have had to. He, to this day, has never released it, but I've had insider people tell me they only got 3 people that snitched out someone supposedly, and there were hundreds of thousands.
I'm
So
sure.
I'm hoping that this will be what happens across the country. Everybody report your favorite teacher today.
What was I about to say? Oh, someone said, and I'm going to say it out loud here because you could call your member of Congress and say this. And I've seen other people recommend this. If your Republican representative or senator refuses to have a town hall meeting of some kind, Democrats should walk in and have town hall meetings.
Yeah. And also someone said we should be holding Democratic press conferences every day. They should just pick a spokesperson and have their own.
I think I do, but I think it should be, I don't think standing in front of a podium having a press conference, I think we're past that standard mode of communication now. I think we need to do something that's going to get more attention and not seem as old school, because old school is not going to serve us now. But that's another conversation. I talked about it before. I've talked about, meeting an opposition party, and this is part of that conversation. I'm trying to catch up. There was something someone said here. There you go. Look at Jim. Jefferson Encyclopedia posted. What I was going to ask is, can people besides you and us and Claire, you and I and Claire, can they save the conversation, the chat?
I don't know. I mean, I saved them, but I don't know if that's because I'm a co-host.
That's what I'm going to say. I don't know, folks.
Here to send it to me today because I lost half of it when I got logged out. So
but I mention it because if people who are there and are not us can save it, then
I save it and post it in Slack.
Oh,
so
perfect.
If you join our Slack group, I like literally the minute we hang up, I go in and I change the name to something I can remember, and then I post it in Slack. So if you're new here or you haven't joined Slack, if you type the word Slack in all caps and then your name,
say that they can save them. Okay, so what I'm saying
save
is,
it themselves too.
They're posting great press outlets. Save this one. I mean, it'll be in Slack too, but save this one because I've been and continue posting suggestions. But this is great to kind of now. Okay, allow me to pause and pat ourselves on the back at this moment. I know I say this all the time, that anybody can do this, get together on a regular basis and have conversations. Here we're doing this and people are pooling their ideas about where to go, what press they like to read. That's like the most democratic of democratic things, right? This makes my soul happy.
257 weeks worth.
Yeah. Yes. But today's conversation with people listing newspaper titles to go find that, like,
Golden.
yeah, yeah. And we can't do that as effectively by ourselves. So
Yeah.
this is like a community thing. So anyway, yeah.
Yep. All right. Julia Brennan, our good buddy, says how to balance open press coverage yet inclusion of newer news sources with large, particularly younger audiences, not just traditional shrinking news organs. She says things like within the WHCA, who can ask a direct question in the White House press conferences. So she's wondering if you had any thoughts on that.
On how to get
Non-traditional news sources out, because younger voters are the ones that we've got to capture. I think David Hogg, the young man who was one of the victims at the Parkland High School shooting that now started his own PAC, he's been elevated now. He's in the leadership of the Democratic Party. They
that's
carved out
what
a
we
space
need.
for him, and
That's
he's trying to do that.
That's what we need. I mean, I don't have the answer, but what I do believe is that we need a new, well, not even one. We need new generations of leaders, right? So, in part, that means younger people like Jasmine Crockett or, Jamie Raskin. I don't know how old these people are, but they're not the older generation of politicians. They're a notch below, and even a generation later, newer, that's the word I'm looking for, than them, like David Hogg and the very young people. We need these people to be, in part, informing us about what their cohort does and how their cohort reads and where they get news from and targeting that. We need this is why I sort of responded to the idea of having a press conference. Because it's not bad, but when I say old school, but we need some new school ways and we need a new generation of people telling us how to better reach people. So Nan, yeah, I wondered how old Jamie Raskin is. I was like, Jamie Raskin is young. And then I thought maybe he's my age. Does that mean I'm young? But at any rate, I do think we need to get younger folk, and maybe David Hogg can, sort of help now that he does have kind of an official role. Find out from people, talk to students, talk to college students. Where do they go? How do they get news? What would they be willing to check out if it was out there? Because, I can guess based on talking to college students all the time, but they're going to be the ones who know what they trust and where they go and how they do what they do. We need to do that like now, like yesterday, but that's part of the answer to the question is to get younger generations of people telling us the kinds of things that they do to get their news and information.
Yeah, people are asking Sydney, one of our favorite undergrads here.
Sydney, yes.
She goes for news. And I was going to say the Smithsonian Made by Us Coalition is a bunch of museums and organizations that are particularly targeting millennials and Gen Z. And we're part of that group. And they are pushing things out through Instagram explainers. They do these amazing Instagram explainers about what's happening in the news and breaking it down for younger people to give them the context. And those are amazing. So if you're still on Instagram, follow Made by Us. Thank you, Jim, put the link in there for me. Their Instagram explainers are amazing. We've collaborated on a couple of them. We did one on gun violence and one on redlining with them, but they've done them on women's suffrage, tariffs. They broke down what is a tariff and just really helpful resources.
I'm trying to catch up on the chat because as ever, slipping by. Yeah.
All right.
Oh, now I have to quote Dale, Mark Twain mode. There are only two forces that can carry light to all the corners of the globe, only two, the sun in the heavens and the Associated Press. It's a good quote. Anyway. So yeah.
Okay, so Kathleen V asks, the media called out Speaker Johnson for lying about who attended the town hall, criticizing the administration. Is this blatant lying ever been this bad in the past?
Repeat the question for me.
She says the media called out House Speaker Johnson for lying about who attended the town hall meetings that were criticizing the administration.
Oh.
She wondered if blatant lying like that has ever been this bad in the past in other parts of history.
Oh, there's been a lot of lying. There has, but the climate that we're in now is like lying without accountability.
Mhm.
right? Lying with pride, I would say. We're at a moment where people are lying with pride because they assume it's not going to get caught. They assume there are lots of people out there that are going to back them up in the lies. And that's what's happening, right? The again, this gets back to flooding the zone. But I wouldn't say lying is certainly not new, but unaccountable lying as a method of governance, that's pretty extreme. And that's kind of where we are, is lies as a norm. Lies are not a norm, and it's never been a norm for a president to blatantly and openly, consistently, frequently lie. Not so presidents have lied before, but degree and kind and amount, we're kind of in an interesting zone at the moment for that. I also want to respond. I do want to say, I want to make it clear when I was talking about going out and finding news sources, and I said it, but I'm going to say it again. I'm not saying go only find news sources that agree with you. I'm just saying find sources that are not necessarily in the room. We should be informed about what people on all kinds of politics are thinking. And, so put out here, if I would love to see in chat outlets of all kinds that people feel are reliable. Maybe they don't, the whatever slant they have don't quite agree, but if you feel that they are reporting and are reliable and are basically using facts in some way, put them in chat.
Yeah, and remember to be civil. It's okay to not agree if you don't think
Yes.
the media source is one that you subscribe to or believe is unbiased, but also remember we're all part of the same community, so be polite in your responses. All
Yep.
right, I think we've answered all the questions that I can see. If anybody had any that we didn't answer, that means I didn't get them. So,
Let me ask Susan, what do you mean when you say, does anyone feel uncomfortable doing this? You mean like being here or is it something else?
oh, I don't. Susan.
Does anyone feel uncomfortable doing this? Um, Sharing news sources? I just want to know.
Yeah, I'm not sure what.
Yeah. Um, Susan, if you could explain that, because I would love to address it.
Oh,
Um,
searching for and listening to the other side.
Publicly sharing chat. Oh, are you worried about, well, that's interesting. Are people worried about people being able to see the chat?
It's not posted on a public site. You have to belong to the Slack group. So that means you're here anyway. So everybody's already seen what you did. Nobody from the outside can get into Slack. So it's only people that know about History Matters and participate. If anyone were to somehow stumble upon this group and then ask to join Slack and then they start posting unkind things, they'll be kicked out immediately. I mean, I get a notification every time any of you post anything there. So I will easily kick out people. And if it becomes a problem, we'll just, you know,
And
not new members unless I vet them a little more. I
it,
hope we don't have to get to that because I really don't have time to vet everybody that much. I
no,
trust that if you're here every Friday, you're a good human, and you care about history and you care about people. So we have not had any trolls in the 257 weeks we've been doing this. So I hope it stays that way.
Sydney, what question did not get answered?
Oh, that means I didn't see it, Sydney. I'm sorry.
Is that like Rosie is throwing water?
How can she with her? Is she taking her wing and like splashing?
She's in her bathtub.
That's hilarious.
Oh my God. I'm like, you chose to have a bath now, bird? At any rate, I I don't know what Sydney's question was. Um, if you could repeat it, we
Yeah.
have a minute or two.
Put it in the Q&A, Sydney. Karen asked, is and how are the foreign press being affected by all this? So is there a ripple?
And this I don't know. Oh, here,
We have
Sydney.
a lot of people that join us from other parts of the world. So are you guys losing anything because of what's happening on our side of the pond. A
Right.
big one for them.
And I mean, I would assume they are, but I'm curious, for example, about like what the BBC and the Guardian say because they're from another country. And, as a historian, when I want to understand what's going on in America, in early America, I go and look in France and England because they're going to have a different output. Would you?
I like to watch the BBC anyway because they don't yell at you when they're reporting. No
That's
matter
true.
how, no matter
Oh,
what's going on in the world, the British people, they're just like, good evening today. Da, da, da,
it's
da, da.
true.
Like I don't like get all anxious when I listen to BBC. So
I mean, I'm sorry, I'm getting like sprinkled.
so Kathy
Yeah.
reposted Sydney's question. Thank you.
Yeah. So
Kathy
Sydney,
said, this control of the press and media is scary and mirrors the type of control that is the bread and butter of dictatorships. What has allowed this to happen? Is there any thing that can be done? Has this happened before? And what is different about this now? Thank you, Kathy.
yes, thank you. I'm
Sydney.
sorry. I'm wiping off my coffee table full of water.
It's like you're taking another shower. Rosie's a little mischievous. I like it.
I mean, we've had all kinds of issues with the press and people, silencing the press and, McCarthyism and any number of other waters coming up with the emoji. I didn't even know that existed. We have had this before. Part of what's happening now is in the same way that I said people are like lying with pride and bigoted with pride, is that we are now in a climate where things that are supposedly not supposed to be acceptable are seemingly being accepted as norms. What to do about that, I don't know. I don't have the answer to that, but we are at a moment where things that should not be norms and things that people should not be talking about with pride, like everything's coming out from under its rock and declaring itself good. And the idea that the state can control the media and oust outlets it doesn't like, that's exceedingly anti-democratic and is not in the American tradition. And those are facts. But what we do about that, I don't know. I do know that if we go out and find other outlets and get our news from other outlets and discuss those other outlets and engage with those other outlets, if we pull away some of our eyes away from some of these outlets that seemingly are doing the bidding of someone else, I don't know the impact that that'll have, but it might have an impact. She got out of the bathtub. This is good. Okay, we're like 2 minutes over, so
we did all the questions. Oh, one just popped up. Do you want to try and do the last
yeah,
one?
let's try one more.
Susanna Pierce says, could a list of these suggested media sources from the chat be posted as a comment on the Facebook post of this broadcast for those not in Slack? I
don't know. I don't think.
I don't, because that is public facing and anybody
Yeah.
can see it, so I wouldn't feel comfortable. You can save the chat, Susanna, but I would prefer you don't post it in a public facing site like Facebook. Slack is protected because you have to ask to join.
Well, and in part because if you put it on Facebook, like
Oh,
NCAG is sponsoring us, but this isn't theirs.
right.
So I don't want to give ownership or
Right.
right.
To Meta, exactly. But thank you for asking.
No, but actually, really, thank you for asking.
Yeah.
So yeah, and particularly not Facebook, seemingly. Okay. We are 3 minutes over. So let me explain what will happen now. We are now going to go to the after party. And what that means is we will no longer be recording so that we can be even freer and easier in our conversation. If you are watching us on Facebook, you need to leave Facebook and go to ncheteach.org/conversations. That's ncheteach.org/conversations. And then you too will poof, be in the after party. If you are watching us through NCHE, just stay right where you are and poof, you will be in the after party. As ever, bird poof. Yeah, he's been poofing the entire conversation. I want to thank you all as ever. I want to thank my wonderful partner in crime, Annie, and my other partner in crime, Claire, and NCHE, and Jessica. and John and everyone for enabling this. I want to thank you guys for being here as ever, week after week, and asking really, really good questions and proving that we are here as a community week after week. I want to thank you, as I always do, for engaging in the conversation of democracy, which is in part a conversation where we, the people, get together and ask questions about people in power, events happening because of people in power, what's going on in the nation around us, what do we think about it, what might we do about it? That's the conversation of democracy. We deserve to have varied opinions. We deserve to have opinions. We deserve to be informed about what's going on with the people who we give power to. We deserve all of these things. And the essence of that entitlement is us being here and being able to talk about it and reconfirm for each other that that is what democracy means. Being informed, coming together to discuss what's going on, and then deciding what to do about it. So anyway, I want to thank you for all of that. And I guess now we can go to the after party.